everyone. This is a work session. It's August 27th. Thanks for being here. And I guess I'll just turn it over to our leadership to present. Good morning. Could you all just, as you speak, identify yourselves for the record?
Good morning, Jennifer Cooperman, Chief Financial Officer and Director of the Bureau of Revenue and Financial Services. I'd like to welcome everybody today here to today's work session, and my remarks are going to be very brief. I'm going to turn it over to Lester and his team. We have a stupendous procurement team, and they work hard. They know their stuff, and I'm really proud of them and look forward to everything that you're about to hear and learn about in today's work session. So, Lester.
Thank you, Jennifer. Good morning. I'm Lester Spittler, the Chief Procurement Officer. We are thrilled to be here today. This amazing team behind me is the Procurement Services team. This is the team that works hard day in and day out to make sure that the city is a good steward of the taxpayer dollars we spend. So we've never had a work session with council. This is our first time, and we're thrilled to have the opportunity. We're going to use it as an opportunity, number one, to talk about the code changes, and our objective is to hopefully walk out of here with support for those and to schedule a future session where those can come for a vote. But we're also going to use it as a showcase, an opportunity to showcase what we do for the city, how we do it, why we do it, and the value and the impact that our services bring to both the city and the community. So you have before you a rather lengthy slide deck. We will go through that, and happy to answer any questions whenever you have them. So the agenda today, again, we're going to introduce procurement in general to council, give you a better understanding of what it is that we do. We're going to talk about some of the progress and innovation that we've done over the past year and a half or so to make our process more inclusive, more transparent, and more efficient. We're going to give you a preview of some of our social equity data that we've been able to collect with a new software implementation, and hopefully use that to make informed decisions in the future about where to spend certain resources and make our efforts. And then lastly, we're going to talk about the code changes. Does that sound okay?
Sounds good.
Okay, so our mission, we're an internal customer support function for the bureaus. We help them acquire the outsourced goods and services that they need to perform their operations. Our vision, we want to deliver faster, better, higher quality customer service. We also want to be transparent. We want to create opportunities, remove barriers, and ultimately find opportunities to make this process more efficient. Last fiscal year, our office executed $1.7 billion in contracted out dollars. Now, that's not the spend that happened last year, but that's the spend that is associated with the contracts that we awarded. So that number right there is a huge number, and that's what runs through our office in a given year. So here you have the three buckets of city code. You have 534, which is the construction code. You have 533, which guides our goods and services procurements and contracts. And then you have 568, which is the professional, technical, and expert services. We'll start with construction. We're going to go into some of the programs that we have in place that instill equity in our system. We're going to talk about some of the code changes that we're proposing, some other requirements that apply to construction procurements and contracts, and then we'll quickly go through the alternative delivery process for CMGCs and design builds. So an existing program that we have is the Subcontractor Equity Program. This is our 20% aspirational goal for subcontractors and suppliers. And this applies to construction contracts over $150,000. The Workforce Training and Hiring Program applies to prime contracts for construction over $200,000 and subcontracts over $100,000. There's a requirement for 20% of the labor hours to be performed by registered apprentices. There's also a goal that 18% of the hours need to be performed by minority workers and 9% by female workers on every job that applies to.
Excuse me, Lester.
Yes.
You said that for the prime contract, I'm sorry, maybe it was the workforce, it requires 20% minority contractors.
So the workforce training and hiring, 20% of the hours on a project have to be performed by registered apprentices.
By registered apprenticeship.
Yeah.
And 18% is an aspiration, and what is the 18%?
18% of the hours need to be performed by minority workers.
By minority workers?
Per trade.
Per trade.
Yeah.
And so why is one required and one an aspiration?
Kathleen?
Is this on? Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So we have aspirational goals for minority and female participation. We have never had hard goals. I think to do hard goals, as far as workforce participation goes, we would have to have some kind of disparity study that would support that.
We've done a bazillion of those over the years that consistently show that African-American contractors are not getting the contracts at the rate that they should.
Right, so our disparity studies have focused on contracting, not workforce. So that is the biggest difference, is that we have not done a workforce disparity study to see if there's any disparities in terms of participation.
Could you identify yourself, please?
Oh, sorry, I'm Kathleen Massier with Procurement Services. I am the Compliance Services Manager.
So our other program, and this is a program we are very proud of, it's foundational for us, is the Prime Contractor Development Program. And that is only open to certified firms, and construction projects under $1 million get competed amongst the members of that program. So they're not competed on the open market, they're only competed in this sheltered market of firms that are certified.
Excuse me, Lester. When we spoke yesterday, we talked about the certification, so it's the state certification program.
Yes.
And the percentage of certified firms that are people of color versus those who are not certified by the state, what is the breakdown percentage-wise?
I don't know, we'd have to look at the Secretary of State website and then compare that to the COBID website.
Well, I'm sorry, I thought based on your data, there was like 80%
Oh.
weren't certified and,
Yeah, those are the contracts that we've awarded. That's a slide that's coming. I'll show that in a minute, talk about that.
I'm sorry, I'm getting ahead of
No worries.
the class.
That's fine.
So this slide right here, this shows the makeup of the Prime Contractor Development Program. You can see the different colors represent different certified firms, and this represents the past 3 years. So for example, this past fiscal year, there were 11 minority-owned business enterprises in the program, and you can see the other certifications made up there. This next slide, this shows the growth and the success of the contractors in the Prime Contractor Development Program. The graph to the left is the average value of eligible contracts that were awarded to contractors in the program. The graph to the right shows the increasing value of contracts that Prime Contractor Development Program contractors have been awarded over time. Are you
I'm so-
not, it's not
we
following?
seem to be out of order. Are we going to go back to the previous slides, or should I just keep going now? Because we didn't do a whole lot of this, or this slide at all.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I guess go to the graphs for Prime Contractor
So
Development
go
Program.
to the graphs. and
Yeah,
look.
I'm sorry.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so those are our 3 social equity programs that apply to construction. These are the code changes on the slide here. There's 2 main code changes that we're asking council to consider. One is to increase the threshold for which the pre-qualification program applies from 250,000 to $1 million.
This one.
I'm just going to wait. Sorry. The first one was to kind of show an agenda for what we're going to talk about in construction and then dive into the details. I'll try to be better about telling you to go to the next slide.
This is your first time, Lester, so you're doing fine. It's all good.
We have 2 hours, right? So the pre-qualification program, that's a requirement for construction contractors. Any contractor that wants to participate in a city opportunity has to first get pre-qualified. So they submit an application that shows their past project history and some references, and they submit that to a board that we staff that's representative of the infrastructure bureaus. So it has Parks, Water, BES, PBOT, and Facilities that are all represented. These applications get reviewed and voted on, and then contractors move into being a pre-qualified status, and then they're free to bid on contracts when they come up. So that's a barrier for small contractors that, want to get their feet wet with the city and come in and explore smaller opportunities. So by raising that threshold to $1 million, it also aligns with the Prime Contractor Development Program. So remember, all projects under $1 million get competed within the Prime Contractor Development Program. So we don't also feel like firms in that program need to go through the pre-qualification process.
So I don't understand how increasing what does it mean, the the threshold? What does the threshold mean?
So right now, if a contractor wants to bid on a project over $250,000, they have to be pre-qualified. If we raise it to $1 million, then those contractors in the PCDP do not need to get pre-qualified. They can enroll in the program, receive technical assistance. We support their growth and capacity. And then the idea is that eventually they graduate and compete on the open market. So aligning the threshold with the PCDP threshold is removing a barrier for those contractors in that program.
So what you're saying is that they are already qualified, they're just qualified for a higher dollar amount of contracts with the city of Portland. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Is that helpful, Commissioner? I see you still look a bit perplexed.
So there's also an application and a review process to get into the Prime Contractor Development Program. So contractors that want to enroll in that program also have to submit an application that also tells us their past project history, gives us some more information that lets us assess what their capabilities are as far as what kind of projects they can compete for and successfully complete.
Why is it a problem to get pre-qualified?
It's not a problem. It's just, for a small company to maintain their pre-qualification status with the city, it's just one extra thing that they have to do to be in good standing. I will say that in some cases, it is a barrier. If you're a company that maybe can't show past project history relative to what you're asking for, the board is not going to pre-qualify you, and then you are not eligible to bid on projects.
Not to mention, we have a long history of not actually achieving our goals around creating opportunity for minority and women-owned businesses. And so this program was developed specifically to actually mentor those small businesses through a city process, which, as you know, is very encumbersome.
Right, but is that what we're talking about here with the pre-qualification thing? The Prime Contractor Development Program?
Yeah, we're essentially removing the pre-qualification requirement for contractors in the Prime Contractor Development Program.
Okay, thank you.
Because they're already pre-qualified, because they've already gone through a process, right? So we're not saying that they're not gonna, we don't know if they're qualified. We already know they're qualified, right? We're just removing that additional barrier. So my question is, when the infrastructure bureaus meet to decide whether or not someone, a small contractor, should be included into the program, what is the criteria they use to make that determination? And is each bureau using the same criteria to make those determinations?
Yeah, so it's a program that we procurement services run, and we staff the board. And so there's an application that has different classes of work. So road work, for example, is its own class. And contractors come in and say, I want to bid on jobs up to $5 million for PBOT for road work. And they tell us their past project history relative to road work, relative to the number, to the threshold they're asking to be pre-qualified for. And then the board, it's a group of representatives that get together and talk about this information, talk about whether there's been experience with this particular contractor, whether it was positive or negative, and then there's a collective discussion about whether the board wants to approve this contractor at that threshold.
And so the code change is just for the Prime Contractor Development Program, it's not across the board?
There's
It's removing pre-qualification for all construction contracts under $1 million. But
So then what about companies that are not in the development program? Don't we want to know that they are going to be qualified to do it?
so 95% of jobs under $1 million get competed within the Prime Contractor Development Program. It might even be higher than that. So if the city lets a contract for under $1 million it's going to go to PCDP to get competed. So we're really trying to attract contractors to that program. We opened up an application period this past January, and we got more contractors that are in the program, and we intend to continue to do that.
I would feel more comfortable if the code said that it's for that program.
Well, it aligns with that program, but the code change is not for the program. They're separate.
But then you could, even if it's only 5%, you've got firms bidding on a relatively big contract, or bigger than they can now.
That's a really good
without
point.
having any kind of screening.
So we've worked with the board. We have implemented a measure to take those 5% of the projects into account. So we've developed a questionnaire. So if there's a job that's under $1 million that for some reason is not competed within the prime contractor development program, we let it on the open market. When we determine the apparent low bidder, we now will ask them to submit a responsibility questionnaire that talks, it's basically the pre-qual app, but it's a little bit more detailed. So that allows us to qualify a contractor case by case for those 5% of the projects that don't get competed within the prime contractor development program. And the pre-qual board has worked with us throughout this process. They've reviewed this questionnaire. They all feel comfortable with it. There have been several conversations with the chief engineers in each of the bureaus, and they're supportive of this. They've been supportive of this. We've just been waiting for the opportunity to get council to approve the code changes. Yes, I should have said that earlier, sorry. So the other code change that we're proposing relative to construction is to increase the emergency procurement threshold from $150,000 to $1 million. This aligns with the non-emergency contract threshold that council approved last April. And, so if a declared emergency, either citywide by the mayor or bureau specific, there's an expedited process for procurement that's in our code. It encourages competition, but at the end of the day, the bureau needs to get contracted services secured immediately to respond to the emergency. So this allows the city to do that up to $1 million without coming to council for authorization. Are there any questions or concerns
When will
about
it
that?
come to council?
So that's a good question. Each commissioner in charge of a bureau can also ask to sign the contract, and you could bring it back to council after the contract has been executed to memorialize it in front of council. That would always be an option. But for contracts under $1 million, that would not be a requirement with this change.
So it sometimes wouldn't come to council if the commissioner in charge chose not to.
Right.
So I'm a little concerned about just directly contracting, even in an emergency, without city council oversight. I mean, $1 million is a lot of money, right? So could we add a process whereby there's a step? I mean, we don't want to slow down the process in an emergency, but can we add a step that actually requires the city council to affirm that this was an appropriate action that was taken?
After the fact?
I just will speak on behalf of the public utilities. Sometimes an emergency is an emergency, and there is no opportunity for an intervening council meeting. So there would be an opportunity for an after-the-fact debrief or a report to council or something else, but there are some times that an emergency requires that the contract go out immediately in order to prevent greater harm to the community. So that's where there has to be a balance. It doesn't happen a lot, but an emergency, I think it would be a mistake to build in a requirement of council action, because sometimes emergencies truly are emergencies.
But couldn't it be a blessing afterwards? Yeah, the contract's gone out, but yes, council still, because I'm concerned about the transparency and accountability. The public needs to know that this contract went out for $900,000.
I think after the fact, in those rare instances, serves transparency and what Commissioner Hardesty is alluding to, and is a report to council is certainly reasonable. I would support that, as long as we're not mandating at the front end that in every emergency there has to be a council action.
Thank you for that, Commissioner. For me, again, I don't want to slow down an action in a real emergency. We sit in this board, and of course, we have emergencies every week that we're voting on. And so I just want to make sure that there is council oversight. So, I mean, there has to be a balance between a real emergency where we have to spend big money quickly, right? But it should be the next city council meeting where we're having a conversation about that. So I would support something like that, but I cannot in good conscience, based on all the emergencies I see from this body, support something that just says in an emergency, you just get to go and hire somebody.
Can I just draw a distinction between the designation that we put on our agenda of certain items being emergency items, meaning they go into effect sooner than the 30-day period. And that sometimes is just a function of timing, of contract renewal or whatever. We're talking about a true emergency where there's a pipe bursting or something happening that requires an intervention. And I think under those circumstances, it's perfectly appropriate to have an after-the-fact report to council. And if council's not satisfied, then that won't happen again.
So is there a definition of emergency in the proposed code?
Yes.
What is it?
Give us 1 minute.
I predict it'll be very vague.
While he's looking at that, what would be the timeline for coming back to the city council based on your proposal?
Well, I think, once we get through all of the changes and understand any amendments that you'd like us to make, we could be ready to go very quickly, or if you'd like to put some time in between the work session and us coming back, we're happy to do that too. But, we're really here on behalf of the bureaus. There are.
Oh, I'm sorry, you misunderstood my question, or maybe I just wasn't as clear as I could have been. I'm still talking about the emergency action
Oh,
that you
I'm
would
sorry.
take.
I'm sorry.
And so, based on how you're presenting it, when would you be coming to council to tell us what happened?
The next regular scheduled meeting?
I think I would support that.
Okay.
Well, you have to file to get it on, so it probably wouldn't be the next year, it'd be the one after that.
Might not be the next one, you're right. It might be
Yeah.
the next one that we could get on the agenda for.
Commissioner Glenn Falolev with the City Attorney's Office. To answer your question about the definition of emergency, emergency is defined as a circumstance that could not have been reasonably foreseen or create a substantial risk of loss, damage, or interruption of services, or a substantial threat to property, public health, welfare, or safety, and require prompt execution of a contract to remedy the condition.
So the first part of that, could you read that again, the first phrase?
The first part is an emergency, is circumstances that could not have been reasonably foreseen.
See, that I think is problematic, because
But that alone can't be an emergency, sorry, right? It has to be.
then the other clauses were all or rather than and. And
It's and.
And.
I'm sorry.
And.
it's and.
Yes.
Thank you.
How many contracts are we talking about at this $1 million threshold? Can you give us a thumbnail?
I would say a handful, no more than 10.
Per year?
Yes.
Okay.
So since we're in the total weeds of this, I have another question. Why are we going from 250 to $1 million? Why not 250 to 500,000 for the pre-qualification threshold? What data do you have that supports that this is going to help the program be more successful?
The main reason is just to align with the threshold for the prime contractor development program. So
sorry, say that again?
if we still had pre-qualification at 500,000, that means there would be contractors in PCDP that would still have to get pre-qualified, as well as be in the program. So it's still that double barrier, the double requirement for them.
And so from this program, from the PCDP, the acronyms just make you a little batty. From this program, then folks can move into the primary contractor pool, right, which is the next graduated level for these contractors, is that correct?
Yes.
And then they will be mentored through that $1 million plus process until they're then ready to go in the open market.
So they're in PCDP up to $1 million. If they compete on jobs over $1 million, technically they're on their own.
Ah, okay.
But, they still receive assistance from the prime contractor development program, so they're still receiving that mentoring and that helps them be successful in that project. But that would mean that they've been successful bidding and competing for a job with the open market contractors, so that would be a good sign. That would be a metric of success. So just going back to the emergency procurement, so
Can I just observe that I think we're on page 4 of a 30-page PowerPoint, and we have 1 hour, and
I thought we had 2.
1 hour left, or an hour and a half left. But I'm eager to get into the weeds as well as, but I'm also hoping that when we're finished, there's a takeaway that you want us to have, because
Yes.
this is very complicated stuff, and I'm hoping that you're going to frame for us a takeaway.
I think excuse me, Commissioner, I think what he wants is for us to support the code changes that he's going to move forward.
Yeah.
He's already put that on the table.
There's one more takeaway too, actually, and this is a good opportunity to introduce it. We would like to hopefully schedule a future council work session to focus on social equity contracting. We're going to preview some slides in here of the data that we're able to collect and that we intend to start using to inform our future decisions. And so we want to engage council and hear which direction you'd like us to go with it, with leveraging that data. So that'll be another takeaway, if you're interested. Okay, so the next slide here, it would say other requirements on the left. So as you know, our code requires us to compete construction projects based on the lowest price unless we come to council for an exemption, which we have done more so in the year and a half that I've been here, to exempt a lot of projects from the competitive low bid requirement. Performance and payment bonds are also a requirement for contracts over $150,000. And these are just to frame some of our general requirements for you.
Those exemptions, just to be clear, those typically are the CMGC?
CMGC or design build, or we've explored a couple other alternatives recently.
And what is the public policy that you point to that justifies doing something other than low bid?
I'm going to point you to the next slide in your presentation. It should say alternative delivery on the left. So there are statutory findings that we need to address that support exempting a project from the competitive low bid requirements. I think there's 17, and so Procurement Services works with the project manager. We draft up those findings. We publish them 2 weeks before we come to council to solicit any feedback from contractors or the AGC. And then once council authorizes the exemption, we're free to issue the alternative delivery procurement, which is oftentimes a CMGC. More times than not. And CMGC stands for Construction Manager General Contractor. So this is also an opportunity to highlight the job order contracting exemption that council approved in May. We asked council to exempt contracts for concrete work and asphalt work from the competitive low bid process, and we were going to use a new approach for the city called job order contracting. And Kelly Davis McKernan, our construction supervisor, is going to introduce herself and give a little bit of an overview of this successful process. And thank you for the exemption that you approved back in May.
Is this on? Okay. Good morning, everyone. I'm Kelly Davis McKernan, the construction supervisor. I just kind of wanted to follow up with the exemption that Lester just talked about for the job order contracting. Job order contracting will allow us to do several projects under each master contractor, up to $1 million per year. This means that we can potentially have $8 million per year for the next 5 years going to these certified co-bid firms. So on June 10th, procurement issued the RFP for job order contracting exclusively for co-bid certified firms. We did extensive outreach, which was spearheaded by our supplier diversity officer, Tiffany Penson, through our community partner organizations prior to the RFP being released. Since JOC is a totally new process for the city, we worked with interested contractors to train them on the process and how job order contracting works and how to respond to the JOC RFP. On June 28th, proposals were due, and we received 11 proposals from co-bid certified firms. A five-member evaluation team scored those proposals. Two of those evaluators were from the Minority Evaluation Program. So on July 12th, procurement posted a notice of intent to award to 8 certified firms. As of now, we've executed 3 of the 8 contracts, and the other 5 are in various degrees of approvals. So PBOT and Parks have already submitted a couple projects through the job order, and we are actively working with these contractors to come up with pricing. I wanted to give a little breakdown on the certification status of those contracts. One contract was awarded to an Asian Pacific female firm. One contract was awarded to a Caucasian female firm. One contract was awarded to a Caucasian male firm. We had one Hispanic female firm be awarded a contract. And then the other 4 are all going to African-American male-owned businesses. So that's where we're at with the job order contracting. It's just now getting off the ground, but we see it's going to be a very successful tool for our bureaus and our co-bid firms that are being awarded these contracts.
So, when you talked about these firms are pre-approved because they're part of this program, right?
Yes.
So I want to be clear, we're talking city certification as compared to state certification? Or can you not get city unless you have state?
There's just one certification program, and it's through the state.
Okay. And can you get into the city's procurement process if you are not registered with the state?
Not for this particular RFP. It was exclusively for certified firms.
But we do have a vendor portal that is open to any firm that wants to register to receive notifications of opportunities.
And so, because we know there's only like 20%, I believe, of minority firms that are actually certified through the state of Oregon, are we missing opportunities because we are limiting our outreach to folks who are registered with the state?
Likely, yes.
And so what are we doing to actually increase that pool?
So Tiffany works with all of our community partners that represent contractors, and we encourage them to get certified because right now, those are the parameters of what we have to work within. If the city stood up its own certification process, we could design it differently than COBID at the state, but right now, those are the rules that we have to live by. So we do encourage lots of firms to get certified. There are lots of opportunities that we've recently started to explore, not in construction, to reach out to firms that may or may not be certified, but if we know that they're minority owned, we will encourage them to apply for opportunities. We'll provide intentional engagement training to help them understand, how to navigate the city's requirements. But certification is what we encourage contractors to obtain.
And do you have any data on the reasons why many people choose not to be certified with the state of Oregon?
We do not.
So 80% of folks in business aren't certified, but we encourage people to get certified so that they can get into a program that's supposed to benefit those communities. But we don't know why I think maybe 75 to 80% aren't certified, but it's a huge number of the people who are doing business every day. So I think that we're missing a huge opportunity because we rely on a state system, quite frankly, that's very convoluted, very invasive, and in fact really doesn't do anything for small contractors to get the money. I know because I went through the process myself when I was a small business owner, and it absolutely got me $0, right? And so we're telling small firms, jump through all those hoops so that we will help you. I'm going to stop there because we've had this conversation a lot, but I wanted on the public record that we're missing a huge opportunity to really help small businesses in Portland because we're relying on a system that's quite frankly flawed.
Can I speak to that?
Yes.
Hi, my name is Teresa Green. I'm the procurement supervisor for the services team, and thank you. I do agree with you that we are missing opportunities, and that the State of Oregon's COVID website is literally our go-to place to find state-certified firms. What I would like us to do is to be able to go out and increase our eligible pool of minority-owned firms, but that's going to take a lot of work. I have actually attended meetings and work sessions where we did have a panel of state-certified firms there speaking. It's really important that we go and we listen to the obstacles that they're facing. And I really ask them, pointed questions. One, why is this working for you, or why is this not working for you? And two, what can the city of Portland do to make this easier for you? And what I've learned is that a lot of the small companies are really intimidated by the bureaucracy of our process. They have to register with different agencies. We all have different requirements. Our systems don't speak to each other. It's a lot for a small company to keep track of. So I'm finding personally that they are good with status quo. They they have their contacts. They're getting the contracts that put the bread on the table, and they really don't see the need for that. But what we really try to advocate is that it is a cumbersome task to take on, but that's where we're going to find you. That's where we need you to be so that we can get our procurement opportunities to you.
Thank you. I greatly appreciate that.
Thanks, Teresa. Okay, so we're going to move on to goods and services. So this would be, go to the next slide, and there's going to be 4 vertical bars, and this is an agenda slide for what we want to cover with the goods and services. So I'm going to ask you to go to the next slide now that has code changes on the left. And there's one code change that is specific to our goods and services bucket, and that is to replicate the direct contracting authority that exists in our professional, technical, and expert services bucket today in the goods and services. That has been wildly successful. I'm going to show a graphic here that in a minute that, well, it'll be later on in the presentation, I'm sorry, getting ahead of myself. That shows the success of our direct contracting program in PT. There's been lots of disadvantaged minority and women-owned firms that have been invited into the city without having to respond to a solicitation. They develop relationships, they understand how to navigate our systems all the way from getting paid, and then that sets them up for success later on when they want to compete for an RFP or respond to an invitation to bid. So the direct contracting it's another barrier removal for those small firms that really want to come in and just get their feet wet and develop relationships.
Is the 150,000 per calendar year or per contract?
That's very interesting. So that would be something that we would want to explore with council. Is it one contract for 150 per bureau? Is it one contract with the city? I think there are lots of architectural and engineering firms that do business with all 5 of the infrastructure bureaus. And so I think there's value to that, for them to be able to work with each of those 5 bureaus and develop those relationships. But maybe it's one contract per bureau per fiscal year. Those would be the controls that I would propose.
I was more concerned about, I'm going to give you a contract for 150,000 for 1 month. For 1 month, and then I'm going to do the same thing again next month.
Oh, we in procurement services would monitor that, would not allow that.
What would not allow?
We would not allow that in procurement services. We would monitor that and prevent that from happening.
I'd be more comfortable if it said something in the code about what the limits are, but 1 per bureau per year that sounds too restrictive.
It does? Okay.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that, again, there's the accountability that it's not
being
commissioner knows somebody, so we're going to just keep giving them contracts.
Okay,
But I think it needs to specify in the code that you get to say.
okay. Well, we'll come back
Not
with
allowed.
with a proposal to the language that's in code now. That gives a little bit more specificity for what is allowed and what's not. Go to the next slide here, and on the left, it has the word small with a fishbowl. And so within our goods and services procurement bucket, there are lots of thresholds that we need to pay attention to, and most of them are driven by the state. So the state small procurement threshold is $10,000. Competition is encouraged but not required. Bureaus and project managers can solicit quotes via email. It can be a very informal process, and that allows them to move rather quickly for those low-dollar contracts. The next slide says intermediate on the left. So,
Excuse me, Lester, what's
Yes.
the process now for contracts under 10,000?
there's just, it's a direct engagement. It's like our direct contracts, basically.
So there's no public process?
There's
So
no public
bureaus just
process.
sign a contract and it's done?
Yeah. And that's established at the state, but it's also codified in our code here in the city. So the intermediate process is from 10,000 to 150. So again, $150,000 or more requires public advertisement. That's established at the state level. So this is another intermediate process. Competition is required, but it can be done informally. So you could email out a request for proposal and solicit quotes or proposals. And it's a more expeditious process than the formal process. The next slide, it'll say formal on the left, and that just, the point here is anything that's going to cost more than $150,000 has to get publicly advertised for goods and services contracts. Okay, I'm going to go back a slide, and we're going to introduce our goods and services teams, and there's a couple examples of good stories that we'd like to share with you about opportunities where we've been intentional about our engagement and helped bureaus either spend grant money or found contractors that weren't interested in opportunity that ended up getting a contract with the city because of the outreach and engagement that was done. Jeff Blade?
Could I just clarify one thing on the previous discussion?
Yes.
Is this if you're going to be contracting with a certified firm that you get to do these? Or is this across the board, the Bureau gets to do 150?
It's across the board. But the code change that we're proposing for goods and services is to allow the direct contracting with co-bid firms up to $150,000. But these are our normal thresholds for getting competition, conducting a formal versus an informal process.
So we probably want something in there encouraging,
Competition.
encouraging co-bid firms.
Oh, right.
Or minority-owned businesses wouldn't necessarily need to be co-bid.
We work with a group called the Bureau Liaisons, and those are people that are helping the Bureau's project managers solicit, and everybody stops at the co-bid website first to look for firms if there's, and we actually have an intake form, and we ask project managers, have you gone onto the co-bid website and have you searched for firms that are certified that perform this service?
Right, but I'm just thinking of, we want bureaus to be thinking about this even for the small contracts, because as we know,
Yes.
small contracts go to larger ones. So I'd be more comfortable if it was specified you get to do this informal process only if you're going to be using a minority firm.
Okay. Jeff?
Hi, I'm Jeff Blade. I'm the supervisor for the procurement goods team. I've got two of my team members here today, Cindy Phillips and Karen Brown are out here. We've been working on a project with Portland Fire and Rescue for a couple years. They got a FEMA grant for $2.3 million a while back. And that was for operations and equipment to help them perform their services better. What they needed to do was replace their SCBAs, that's the breathing units they use. They've been having some issues with freezing up in our cold, wet environments in the wintertime. So there's a handful of manufacturers that make these. We did a quite extensive search for certified firms nationwide to find out if there are any manufacturers of those equipments that are certified firms. There are none. And then we helped Fire do an extensive testing of the different manufacturer systems out there to find the equipment that actually met their needs. And then this last year, we managed to work with the FEMA representative to make sure that all the procurement portions of the grant terms and conditions were met so that we could actually spend the money and not have to pay it back. We got that taken care of in time for them to receive the units and fulfill the terms of that particular grant agreement. So very successful proposal, very successful work.
They were very appreciative of the help that we gave them throughout that 3-year process. So it's a really good story. Teresa?
Hi again, I'm the procurement supervisor for the services team, and my team members, I'd like you to stand, please.
Very hard to hear you. If you could bring the mic a little closer.
A little bit closer, how about that? I would like for my team members to stand, please. I have Mark Arisa, a procurement specialist, Diet Wolf, senior procurement specialist, James Mooring, our procurement analyst, Mac Dennis, our procurement specialist, and Jen Huang, our senior procurement specialist. Very proud of my team, and very proud of the work that we do under the services group. One contract, or actually one project that I really like to speak to today, actually two, but I'll speak more to one because the process is primarily the same for me, is the garbage and recycling container maintenance, installation, and repair invitation to bid that we put out. The project manager had approached procurement services with a dream, a goal. He had identified a contracting opportunity for minority-owned firms. He had a vision of how he wanted to incorporate them into the project and train them up once they got there, but he didn't really know how to convey that into a procurement process, and that's where we stepped in. So what we did is we really had candid discussions on how we go about incorporating equity and inclusion into the solicitation process. And part of that also included very frank discussions on how we are going to actually support our minority-owned firms throughout this entire process up through when they're working on the contract. So outreach to our minority-owned firms begins very, very early. What we try to do is, again, utilize the state of Oregon's COBIT website to do keyword searches, and we will literally like download the entire directory and do keyword searches to just pick out vendors. But a lot of it also comes from the engagements and the trade shows and events that are attended by procurement services. One in particular was a one-on-one session that our Minority Evaluator Program coordinator, Tiffany Pinson, invited us to. And we actually got to sit down and just really talk with minority-owned firms to see, what their barriers were, what they were facing, and, how we could help. What I historically try to do is basically marry a bureau or a project with a service or a good that a small company can provide. And I will take it a step further and do the introductions and, provide them with a public records request form so that they can take a look at a solicitation that was done in the past or the actual contract so they can get a general feel for, what a city contract looks like and how we get there. At this one meeting in particular, I had met a gentleman who was a general contractor who was really like sitting on the edge of his chair the entire time because he had gone through the entire process, like with the state of Oregon. He was state certified. He had registered in BuySpeed, but he wasn't getting anywhere. He was very frustrated. I'm just getting ready to give up, is what he said. So, I had to basically just, talk him down a little bit and let him know that, you are doing the right thing. You are so close to actually getting what you've been doing all this for, and you don't want to just give up right now. I did let him know that I did have a bid opportunity coming up and that I would notify him when it was available, that I was currently working on it. And so when that opportunity did come available, he, along with all the other minority-owned firms that we identified, were notified of the bid opportunity. So we have BuySpeed that's sending out our notices to everyone who's currently registered. But what I do is I actually take the initiative to email them directly. So they will receive notification of that bid. They will receive the actual bid document attached that they would normally have to go and buy speed for, but I don't know if they're registered. So I want to make sure they have what they need in order to actually just take a look at it and respond. And they also receive an invitation to attend the pre-proposal or pre-bid meeting and contact me with any questions that they have. A lot of the calls that I get or emails from interested companies, they're really in the lines of, I'm not really sure if I can do this, or, it looks intimidating. They express doubts. But what I really let them know is that, it's really important for you to come down and just receive the information. I want you at this meeting so that we can talk to you about not only this actual project, but so that you can learn what it takes to actually submit a bid to the city of Portland and what we require when you do get a contract. It's just educational. It's not going to hurt. Come on down. And they do. And again, for this particular company, we actually had another event at the Awami Trade Show, and he let me know that he was going to be there. Well, come to find out, the project manager, who was really engaged and committed to making this work, actually attended that meeting, the Awami Trade Show with us. So we're there, we've set up our laptops, we got our bids in front of us, or the bid document in front of us, and I'm working the room, I feel like, if I don't have a stack of business cards and sore feet at any event, then, I haven't really done my job. So the project manager was there to give more insight into the actual scope of the project. We came back. Questions started coming in about the bid, and here we have this one particular company giving me a call, freaking out. And we really do a lot of hand-holding, a lot of reassuring, just to get them through the process. Long story short, this contractor was actually, he read through the entire bid document, he submitted his bid to us. He was one of 4 firms that was awarded a contract. 3 of those contracts went to minority-owned firms, so that's like 43% of the total contract value is going to state-certified firms. And again, our goal really is to increase our pool of eligible small business owners that are minority-owned. They don't have to be registered with the state, but I need to know where they are. So that's where we go. Thank you.
As you can tell, Teresa's very passionate about what she does, and she's amazing. She's amazing. Okay, so we're going to transition into the professional, technical, and expert services. So this is our third bucket of services that we contract for. There's a slide that has 4 vertical bars. That's just an agenda slide. We're going to first talk about the code changes, and we're going to go into a little bit more about how Procurement Services manages this bucket of spend for the city. So the code changes. Right now, our PTE manual, which is a document that Procurement Services publishes to the bureaus that directs them on how to procure and contract for PTE services, has a long list of what is considered PTE services. It includes consulting services, for example. So what we've done, we've worked with our bureau customers, and we are proposing to reduce the scope of what is considered PTE. We are reducing it to professions that require a license or a certification to perform those services. Those services that do not require a license or a certification that have historically been considered PTE would now be goods and services going forward. And that is another reason why we're proposing to allow the direct contracting in goods and services, because there are firms that have been getting direct contracts in PTE that in the future will be procured through goods and services, and we want to have that replication of authority in goods and services as well. So right now, the direct contracting authority is set at $100,000, and we're proposing to increase that to $150,000, and that was the same proposal that we're making in the goods and services. And again, that's the threshold for which we're required to publicly advertise an opportunity, $150,000, and that's established at the state level. So the next slide has the word manual on the left, and so again, the PTE code is relatively short. A lot of what is in the goods and services and construction code is in this manual that Procurement Services publishes, which again directs the bureaus on how to procure and contract for these things. PT is also one of the 3 that's decentralized. So that means that the bureaus have the ability to procure and contract for those services without centrally working with procurement services like they do in the other two buckets. We still are involved for checks and balances along the way to make sure that they're following procedures and protocol, but it is a different way of procuring and contracting for those services. When we go out and we talk to the consulting community or architectural and engineering firms, what we hear from them is when they have a PT contract, depending on which bureau they contract with, the requirements can be different. In some cases, a bureau will offer to waive insurance requirements. In another case, the bureau will offer to pay for the premium for a contractor to buy an insurance policy. In other cases, a bureau director can reduce requirements. And so you have these consulting firms that are dealing with 5 bureaus, for example, and they have different requirements in each of those contracts. It depicts the city in a very siloed way. But we've done something about that. Last fall, we were successful in getting your approval of our fall bump proposal, which allowed us to reorganize our team and add additional positions to our procurement staff. We have worked with the infrastructure bureaus to create a centralized model for architectural and engineering services. So we've stood up a design services team, and that team in the future will be the centralized team that supports the bureaus for all of their architectural and engineering procurement and contract needs. That's a relatively significant change for the city, but we've been successful, again, working with the infrastructure bureaus, drafting an interagency agreement, getting concurrence on that, and we have signed IAs in place with those infrastructure bureaus that direct roles and responsibilities for these types of services. All right. On that note, we are going to have Valentine Hellman, our interim supervisor, make an introduction and give a good example of a centralized design RFP that we ran recently.
Hi, my name is Valentine Hellman. I'm actually just the senior buyer for the design team, not interim supervisor. Sorry. That's okay.
Congratulations on your promotion.
Yeah.
That's exciting news. Exciting.
I was going to say, I'm not receiving the pay for interim, so it's prorated. Okay. My team is relatively small. Kim Whalen is also on the design services team, and yeah, we do need a supervisor currently. So small team right now. There's room for more though. So the first design services project that we actually ran was a project for the Parks Bureau. There is a park in the Centennial neighborhood called the Park Lane Park. It's about 6 acres, but there's 20 acres of just quarry land, I guess, next to it that's fenced off. And so they wanted to include all that in the park and hire a landscape architect primarily to come in and design a new park for them. And Parks agreed to work with us and let us run the process for them. So I worked with the project manager to write the RFP. We released it. We did some outreach. I went to the Owami Coffee and Issues, the Oregon Association of Minority Entrepreneurs, where everybody gets 6 seconds to speak in the beginning. Different people are there. They speak about what it is they do, what they're there for. When it was my turn, I stood up and I used my 6+ seconds because I was sitting next to Tiffany Penson, so I got a little more than 6 seconds. But I talked about the Park Lane Park project and what it was the city was looking for. Jenny Nguyen had developed a flyer that we took with us, and we had it there, left it there for people to see. While we were going around doing the 6 seconds, Lester and Tiffany and I were all watching to see what kind of people were there that did landscape architecture work or other work that was associated with the project. And after that 6-second speaking time, when we were kind of just networking, we all went and found people and talked to them and encouraged them to apply for the project. In addition to that, there is a community partners group that Tiffany works with, and she sent out the notification to all of them and the flyer. There's a 1, 2, 3, 4. There's like 9 different groups on there, like the Portland Business Development Group, Philippine American Chamber of Commerce, Asian Pacific American Chamber of Commerce, Hispanic Metropolitan Chamber of Commerce, Latino Built, National Association of Minority Contractors, Owami, Oregon Native American Chamber of Commerce, and Prosper Portland. So they all also received notification of the project and the flyer. In the end, we received 6 proposals from big companies in the area. Of those 6, at the time, 4 of them were certified firms. The a fifth one was working on the certification process at that time, and they've become certified. And actually, that's who the contract was awarded to, Walker Macy. They're now a certified women-owned business, or Women in Business Enterprise, WBE. And that contract is actually coming before council next Wednesday, I hope. That's the last I heard. Yeah, you'll get to hear more about the project then from the project manager and Lester.
Thanks, Valentine. All right, so we're going to move on, and now we're going to get into the various programs that are housed in procurement services that contribute to social equity, sustainability, inclusivity. We're going to have each of those program managers stand up and introduce themselves and give a brief introduction on their program. But first, I have a slide that I forgot about. I want to talk about there's some inherent controls in the procurement process, checks and balances, if you will. We have a vendor portal called BuySpeed, not the best name, but that's what it's called, where all of our vendors register for various commodity codes for services or goods that they want to provide to the city. Then when the city issues a solicitation, we select those commodity codes, and any vendor that is registered gets notified of this opportunity. So that's a great way. There's thousands of vendors that are registered in that system. We often use it for market research purposes. If we want to see if something is not necessarily a sole source, if there's anyone out there, we will issue a request for information on this system. And we get a lot more responses because it's truly a national portal. The vendors aren't just located here in Portland. There's also several public notices that we issue throughout the process. So we issue the solicitations over $150,000 on this portal. They are advertised for a period of 21 days. For construction projects, we also advertise in local newspapers. We issue the bid tabulation when we receive bids so that everybody can see how their bid compared to others. For RFPs, we issue the scoring summary so that proposers have an opportunity to see how their score compared to their competitors. At that point, we also offer debriefs, so we invite firms to come in and we'll sit down with them and tell them where their proposal fell short, where they could do better next time. And those are great conversations because you're helping those vendors learn from their mistakes in their proposal so that the next time they can be more successful. For sole sources, any sole source contract over $50,000, we issue a notice on our system for 7 days inviting other firms that believe they can perform those services or provide those goods to reach out to us and let us know. And then, we're also in an era of being transparent and disclosing our data, disclosing our metrics. So you'll see some metrics later on in the presentation, as well as some social equity data that we intend to make public, and we intend to engage our community partners to help us reverse the trends that we're seeing in that data, reverse the disparities that exist. And so this is the first time that we're truly, being transparent and making those things public. So it's a little bit vulnerable, but it's also very exciting at the same time. Okay, so program managers. First up is the Community Opportunities and Enhancements Program, and that is the 1% set aside for construction projects, and we recently hired a program manager. Kathy Sherrick. Our compliance services team is managed by Kathleen Massey. She introduced herself earlier, and there is a supervisor in the room, Paula Wendorf. And are there any compliance specialists in the room? Angela Peck. Brenda Scott.
We've got A over here.
Thomas A.
Thomas.
Yes. Hey, Thomas. So those are folks that monitor contractors' compliance with our subcontractor equity program and the workforce training and hiring program that we talked about earlier. They attend meetings, they hold the contractors' feet to the fire, they make sure that they're living up to the expectations of those programs. Our contractual risk management program, that's new. That came online when council approved our fall bump. We recently hired somebody to stand that program up. Eric Ram has 30 years of experience in the insurance industry. We're really lucky to have him. The Minority Evaluator Program and We Are Better Together program, of course, two foundational programs of the city and procurement services, and managed none other by Tiffany Penson. Our operations team, that's the team that supports all of the work that is done in procurement services, and we have an amazing team. Jenny Nguyen is a senior admin specialist. Mary Kopelchik Lou Nguyen, and Tony Severe Marcelin. Our procurement card program. So we have over 1,300 cards, well, 1,285, sorry, cards in the hands of city staff that use this as a tool to get their job done. And we have an amazing program manager for that, Aaron Thompson. Aaron in the room? Aaron Thompson. Our prime contractor development program, we mentioned this earlier. We have an amazing person that manages this program too, Stacy Edwards. Our procurement services training program, we have somebody that's dedicated on staff to develop training courses for project managers throughout the city. The objective of this program is to create a base level of knowledge from the project managers on how to interact, how to engage, and how to navigate the procurement process. Les Hardgrove, is Les in the room? Les may not be here. Sustainability, Stacy Foreman is nationally and internationally known for her work in this area, and we're extremely lucky to have her. Stacy Foreman. Okay, now we're going to talk about some progress and innovation. So there's a slide that's titled Progress and Innovation. Go to the next one, and you should see a timeline. So this is just to demonstrate what we've done over the past year and a half. We undertook an organizational assessment last May, or 2 Mays ago, where we engaged community partners, bureau project managers, and procurement services staff. We asked them questions, we got feedback on ways that we could do our job better. We used that feedback to then inform a process improvement effort that allowed us to establish service level agreements for cycle times for various procurements. That was an opportunity to say, hey, Bureau customers, if you submit something to us, this is how long you can expect to work with us, and here are the steps that you need to take in order to get a contract in place. And establishing those service level agreements was paramount in our ability to get our fall bump approved by council. That also allowed us to reorganize and hire additional staff. In February, we officially reorganized. We became a new procurement services, if you will. In March, we implemented a new technology tool, which allows bureaus to submit requisitions to us electronically. Previously, they would have to download a form from our website, fill it out, and send it into a Outlook inbox that was oftentimes referred to as the black hole. So now by submitting it electronically, there is no more black hole. It's very transparent, and we track that requisition throughout the life of the process until a contract is awarded. In April, we were successful receiving approval from you to increase my position's signature authority to 1 million across the board. That reduced the number of contracts that came before council and ultimately allowed those bureau project managers to get those contracts awarded in a more expeditious manner. In April, we also started holding bureau customer meetings. So with our electronic requisition process, we now have a software system that tracks all of our workload. And so we started going around to all of our bureaus and talking about that active workload that we were supporting them on. And we also started to ask them for a forecast list of procurements and contracts that they were going to need from us in the near future. That allows us to take into account sustainability, social equity, and have more of a strategic conversation with them versus being reactive and compliant focused. So those have gone really well. They've continued to evolve, and they're widely attended. I think Asena attended one a couple weeks ago, Commissioner Fish. I haven't gotten her feedback yet, but I'm looking forward to it. And you can see the other steps that we're taking to improve the way we do business, to make it more inclusive, to make ourselves more transparent and more accountable.
So Lester, I just want to say, James Posey really likes you. He thinks that you are really committed to the work that you're doing. And I just want that on the public record, because anybody that knows James Posey knows that he is one of the most critical community members of how the city contracts public dollars. So I just want you to know that I'm a fan because James is a fan, so keep doing what you're doing.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. The one other thing that I want to talk about is we've established a much better rapport with the city attorney's office. So we have collectively worked on creating a better template for the contracts that we execute. And that it's been a really a great working relationship, and we're looking forward to it continuing. They're going to come over and help train our buyers so that, we can be more flexible and have more discretion in negotiating contracts. So I just want to say it's been a really good relationship working with Glenn and the other city attorneys in the city attorney's office. Okay, next slide. There's a Venn diagram with 3 circles, and we're going to speak more about the impact of some of our innovations. So you see here, we're trying to remove barriers, we're trying to be transparent, we're trying to be more efficient. As far as removing barriers and efficiency is concerned, the job order contracting that Kelly presented earlier, that was a measure that really accomplishes both of those things. It allows those bureaus that are going to use those to be more efficient, and it also removes a barrier for the contractors that were awarded those contracts. The expansion of direct contracting, again, removing barriers and creating efficiency, and the removing the pre-qualification requirement up to $1 million. Again, we feel that is an effort to remove barriers and to create a more efficient system. So for efficiency alone, we've implemented the electronic requisition module. That's a new leverage of an existing technology system that we have. We have a new funding model that was approved last fall bump that allows us to, again, be a little bit more intentional about the support that we give to the bureaus and how we align our resources with their needs. And that goes along with the reorganization of our team this past February. So as far as efficient and transparent, we are in the process of redeveloping our project manager training program. Again, we're with our reorganization, there's different services that we're providing, and we're trying to align those training programs with our new service offerings and with what the bureaus have been asking for and feedback. So come January 2020, we hope to have a training regime that project managers will have to go through when they work with us. Transparency, we've developed the service level agreements that I mentioned earlier, and we've created a dashboard to report on those, and we're also developing the training opportunities.
Excuse me, Lester, can you tell me what a service level agreement is?
A service level agreement, it tells our bureau customers how long it's going to take to get a contract in place. So if you scroll to the slide that has service level agreement dashboard on top,
Yes.
on the left column, those are the different procurement processes, the high impact, the high profile, the ones that we conduct the most. You can see that there's a construction invitation to bid, there's 2 goods and services, and 2 PTE processes. The next column, the days specified in the SLA, those are what we told our bureau customers, this is what you can expect as far as a timeline for when you engage us for these various processes. The middle column is how we've done over the past year. And I want to call out the middle row, the goods and services invitation to bid. You'll see 27 days and think, how is that even possible? It's because of the way we established our service level agreements. We had to be consistent this year in reporting on our SLAs. So that number also includes informal processes where bureaus obtain quotes and proposals and submitted them to us. So it's a little skewed. Next year, we'll be able to remove those examples from the data, and it'll be pure to the processes that it's specific to.
And does the red circles mean something?
The red circles on the far right?
Yeah, in the middle and on the right.
Yeah, so the red circles mean that we're not quite hitting the SLA. So we told our customers 90% of the time we'll hit this SLA, so a 90% confidence level. And so the red circles mean that we're not quite there.
Thank you.
So the next slide, I'm not going to go into too much detail, but this is another training implementation that we've developed. It's kind of a desktop guide for a bureau director or anybody in the bureaus that says, hey, I need to buy something, what do I do? This kind of walks you through a decision matrix and leads you to the conclusion, and ultimately, encourages you to contact procurement services for more information. But at a high level, it's a good desktop guide. Commissioner Fish.
Can I just remind our friends at procurement that if you're going to have a piece on a handout like this, can you blow it up for us?
Sure. Sorry about
This
that.
is
Because we're old.
impossible for us to read. I mean, other than it looks very professional.
And it fits the
That's what we were
page.
going for.
Can I go back to the dashboard for a second?
Yes.
Is this dashboard part of the dashboards that you'll come back to us at budget time with?
Yes. These are our performance metrics in our budget.
In your budget. And to what extent have you established these performance level, to what extent have you developed this dashboard with your customers? In other words, ask your customers, what is important to you in terms of our hitting the mark?
So we worked closely with our customers throughout the organizational assessment, throughout the establishment of these service level agreements last fall, and we've continued to work with them, every step of the way.
I just want to make an observation. Our dashboards generally in the city run the whole gamut, and sometimes I think they're overly focused on bureau goals.
Okay.
And not enough on customer feedback.
Okay.
So when we get to the budget discussion, that's a good opportunity for you to talk about how have you engaged our customers? Why are these dashboards important to them? What other dashboards might be relevant for us in terms of knowing that you're hitting your mark?
Sure.
But I tend to think more favorably on dashboards that the customer has had a role in crafting, because that helps us understand that it's a shared process.
Sure. One piece of feedback that I received from lots of bureau folks while I was doing the organizational assessment was, you need to manage our expectations better. You need to tell us how long it's going to take for us to get something in place so that we can do our plan. And so this is a direct result of them wanting us to manage their expectations more. So if somebody submits a construction invitation to bid to us, 90% of the time they should expect that we can get it done in 168 days. And that helps them work with their other stakeholders before they work with us to make sure that they're hitting the mark on when the contract needs to be awarded, when the work needs to start. As you know, we have a work window here in Portland where, the construction season is spring, summer, and early fall. There's not a lot that gets done during the winter. So it's really important to our bureau customers that they get contracts for construction awarded late spring so that the work can get done and delivered during the summer.
Thank you.
So, Lester, give me a scenario where it would take 308 days to get a request for proposal out the door.
That's terrible, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
So included in the data that we used to develop these service level agreements was imperfect, but it was the only data that we had. So it included processes that were put on a moratorium when we moved from the Portland building into our temporary location. And so there were some examples in the data set that contributed to it being 308 days. But as you can see, what we've been performing is 161 days.
Which is still a long time to get an RFP out the door.
A lot of the time is during the evaluation process. So this is from the time that the Bureau submits a requisition to us to the time the contract is awarded. So oftentimes it's outside of our control how we can schedule those evaluation meetings because of vacations and other.
So maybe you want to break that out, because you'll look better if you come to us and say you've done your work, right? And now it's just up to the Bureau to decide, what the process is going to be. So I don't know how you would reflect that in the dashboard, but I think it's important that you're not penalized because something happened that you weren't a part of.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Thank you.
What are the goals based on? I mean, I'm not really sure how to read this. I don't know if 161 days is good or bad. I don't know if 27 days is good or bad. I see it's red, so I assume it's bad. But what's it benchmarked against?
So what we did to establish this is we followed the proverbial piece of paper through each of these processes, and we mapped out step by step what the existing process was. And then we engaged a consultant and used Lean Six Sigma tools, one in particular, value stream mapping, to look at these processes through a Lean Six Sigma process improvement lens and identify opportunities that weren't adding value that could be eliminated, or relationships like with the city attorney office that could improve the time that it takes to get a contract negotiated and through their approval. And so we identified these opportunities, and then we got to work on removing those steps. If it required a code change, we identified a code change, and some of those are why we're here today. If it involved removing a form that wasn't adding value, we did that. So we've done lots of little measures to eliminate those steps. And we do have there's one at the end of this presentation, a process map actually, that might give you a better appreciation for all of the different steps that we have to go through to get a contract in place.
So would it be fair, based on the comments you made earlier and combining it with what you just said, you do look at best practices in other jurisdictions, that's how you shape the process, and now you're measuring against your own performance here in terms of trying to find efficiencies to speed it up?
That's exactly right.
Okay, good. Thanks.
Yes. So moving on to the last slide that says innovations, it has the three removing barriers, efficient, transparency, and this is our new contractual risk management program. And with the resource that we've been able to hire, we're going to take a proactive role and work with our bureaus before we issue a solicitation to right-size the requirements that are in that solicitation. And then we are also taking over the approval of the certificate of insurance from those contractors from the city attorney's office. So we really feel like that will reduce the number of waivers or reduce the number of opportunities that we're offering to pay firms for the premium of their insurance policies. If we right-size and optimize them up front, then we're removing barriers, we're becoming more efficient, and we're being more transparent with the risks that are associated with different goods that we procure or services that we contract for.
And, I guess it's worth putting the elephant in the room on the table. So what's the poster child for this? And how would this approach, and I'm thinking about the police communication system, how would being under this risk management model ensure that the council has more information about the risk?
So we would identify that solicitation is coming, and Eric, our new program manager, would work with the project manager, work with the city attorney's office to understand the risks that are associated with implementing, with maintaining, with repairing, with failure. And we would include the right policies in the solicitation at the right amount so that the city would be protected for, whatever the risks associated with that acquisition would be. The previous approach, we have standard requirements that would apply, and I think, the communication systems, anything that's large is going to require most of our standard policies and standard limits anyway. It's really for those smaller contracts with the small firms, the direct contracts, that if we can optimize the requirements before we solicit, before we engage with them, then they're not having to come back and say, I can't get that, or will you pay for it, or will you waive it? So it's not necessarily for the large projects. They'll reap the benefits too, but it's more for those smaller contracts.
Okay, and is it your intention in council presentations to call out that risk?
We'd be happy to if you'd like to.
Well, I think one of the things that I'd like to see more of, both from the Independent Budget Office and from procurement, is affirmatively highlighting risks, so that even those of us who read the narrative are getting sort of a highlight from a professional that, worst case scenario, if everyone else opts out from this contract, the city will be stuck with the tab. That's the risk. Or worst case scenario, if this vendor goes out of business, there's no replacement, and then we're stuck with the tab. I think and I don't think you have to overdo this, because I think the risk of bringing risk management in is that it adds a lot of time in trying to mitigate every risk, and you can't do that. And if you try to do that, then you're just extending the clock, and you'll get more delays. But I do think there is a balance, and I don't think we've found it yet, where your shop and the budget office at appropriate times say, we've flagged some risk. Here it is. It's not judgmental, it's transparency.
Yeah.
And I would urge your team to do that, because it then gives us a basis to ask questions and to make sure we're satisfied. And I think in the past, we've relied too much on staff to kind of go through documents and sort of do a parallel assessment. I would urge you to call out conspicuous risk so that we're clear-eyed about what we're taking on.
I can explore that in future Chief Procurement Officer reports or the impact statement.
Yeah, and it can either be in writing or it can be oral at council, but it does help sharpen our focus, and we have busy agendas. So someone saying, here's a particular risk, just want you to be aware of it.
Okay.
Then we're all, eyes are wide open, and we're moving forward.
Okay. Thank you. We'll do that.
Based on the scenario that Commissioner Fish presented, what I didn't hear in the group that was going to review it was somebody from the Bureau of Technology Services.
Of course.
And I think that's a deficit in our contracting. We don't normally have technical expertise reviewing the proposal before the proposal goes out. So I would hope that in an area like that, when you're talking technology, that we've got some certified smart people in technology that are actually reviewing it to see if it makes any sense at all.
Yeah, and that's a great time to mention the budget note from the mayor this fiscal year. We've applied for technical assistance through the Government Performance Lab. That's a Bloomberg philanthropy organization, and we were successful in getting awarded that technical assistance. So we're currently working with that group and our Bureau of Technology Services and some key folks throughout the city that can help us look at the IT acquisition process and make some recommendations on how to make it more effective, how to be more proactive and plan ahead and make sure that the stakeholders are taken into account during the scope development, the requirements development, so and identifying risks throughout the way as well. So thank you to the mayor for your support, and we're actively working with your team to explore that.
Whole council supported it. Thank you.
Okay, so the next slide is social equity data preview. And before I get into these slides, the objective of including these is to, again, to prompt your interest and to hopefully get a work session scheduled in the future to focus on social equity contracting strategy with council. So we've recently implemented some technology systems that have allowed us to report on this information. So the first, all contracts by COVID certification for last fiscal year. This is the graph that you were mentioning earlier, Commissioner Hardesty, that showed 82% of our contracts last fiscal year went to non-certified firms. You can see the number that went to disadvantaged business enterprises, minority business enterprises, women-owned firms, and emerging small businesses. The next slide is the number of contracts. So the previous slide was the value, this is the number.
So I don't want to just run over this because I think this is important. So we have $400 million almost that was contracted with non-certified firms, right?
Yes.
And then really small percentages across the board for everything else, right?
Yes.
And so what's going to be different based
Direct-
on what we know now?
The direct contracting in goods and services will make these numbers increase. Increasing the value also to $150,000 will also increase these metrics.
I'm sorry, you said adding the professional services,
The direct contracting to goods and
the
services.
direct contract.
And also examples like the one that Teresa presented on just, being intentional about going out, engaging with firms and making sure they're interested in the opportunity and make sure they're successful and then getting them those contract awards. The next slide, titled Workforce. You can see last fiscal year there was $30.2 million in reported wages to workers on city construction projects. You can see the breakdown by ethnicity as well as the breakdown by gender. This really highlights the disparity that exists. And again, this is an opportunity to leverage this data along with the 1% program to make sure that we're deploying those resources proactively to mitigate these disparities in the future.
Talk about how that 1% process is going to work.
We are, we'll come back to council this fall. Is that enough? Or do you want me to go into more detail?
Well, let me just say that it's, a year and a half now we're waiting. And so I just want to know if minority contractors are going to get any help this year. Or are we waiting for next year?
There's 3 projects that have funds set aside this fiscal year. It totals $2.25 million. We intend to deploy those funds this year. But we first need to come to council to get approval on admin rules, code, as well as an intergovernmental agreement with Prosper Portland.
There'll be an oversight committee that will meet monthly to ensure that the numbers are consistent and that we're actually increasing the pool.
Yes.
Thank you.
So the slide titled Drilling Down on Race and Ethnicity, you can see that there's a red box around the ethnicities that are represented, and I just want to call out, again, the disparities that exist. You can see that it's predominantly Caucasian workers. So again, we want to use this information to make better informed decisions in the future.
How did the renovation of Mayor Wheeler's personal residence make this list?
The Wheeler reconstruction.
Artfully named to give him a little cover, but I think we all know what it is.
When you bring this kind of data in the future, it would be helpful.
Joke about that. I can just see that headline now.
It would be helpful to have what the citywide demographics are, because actually some of these, I think, are minorities are overrepresented in some of these groups compared with the city demographics,
Okay,
which is good.
we can do that. So yeah, this just shows the top 10 projects that expended funds in last fiscal year. And again, we're just highlighting the disparity in the workforce.
Yeah.
The drilling down on gender, again, you can see that there's a few trades here, like the electricians and the sheet metal workers that are bucking the trends, but for the most part, it's a male-dominated industry. So again, these are sort of teaser slides. We have a lot more data. There's a lot more information to present, so we'd like to schedule a future work session if that would be of interest to council.
So Lester, do we require people to report their ethnicity? Because there are large segments that are unspecified or not specified. If we're going to have accurate numbers, we should be getting that information from everyone that we're giving public money to, don't you think?
Yes. Kathleen, can you speak to that?
Sure, yes. It is a required field for those projects that are subject for workforce training and hiring program reporting, so that the ethnicity and gender field is a required field as part of the reporting.
So you know why this report has so many not specified?
That is actually something we're looking into. So this is information that's coming out of our new software system that we have, and historically that has not been a ethnic category that was on our previous reporting. So what we're going to do is look with the software vendor and see if that's a field that we can get removed and move back to the fields that we historically had reported on in the past.
And while we're doing that, could we add other options for gender other than male and female?
I think that's certainly something that we could probably take a look at.
Okay, so we have about 26 minutes left. Want to move into the code changes, if that's okay?
Could you save about 10 minutes for questions at the end?
Yes.
Thanks.
So the slide titled Housekeeping Updates, these are purely housekeeping updates. Previously, there were definitions in each of our 3 sections of code. We've consolidated those into one section to remove inconsistencies. The reverse auction change, there have been some best practices that have evolved since this original section was drafted, and so we're taking advantage of those best practices and just updating our code to allow for more, to account for more of those best practices. Sustainable procurement, last fall, Stacy Foreman worked with your offices to update the sustainable procurement policy. It was a big update, and a lot of those changes needed to be memorialized in code. So it's taking the updates to the policy that council approved last fall and now updating our code to reflect those. The next slide, titled New Process. This is exactly that. It's a new process to the city. It's an unsolicited proposal process, and this would facilitate innovative partnerships with the private sector for opportunities to engage that wouldn't result from a solicitation. So I'll use PBOT, for example. They're doing a lot with mobility. They're doing a lot with open data. And there would be an opportunity for an external firm to see what PBOT is doing in the public eye, realize that they could add value to it, either for no cost or minimal cost, and then they could submit an unsolicited proposal policy to the city to say, dear city, dear Peabody, this is what we think we can do for you. This is how we think we can, help you achieve your mission, whatever it is. We believe that those will increase the opportunities just to be more innovative. Oftentimes, the city doesn't think about solutions to problems, and if we're not thinking about those, then, we're potentially not moving our agenda forward. Commissioner
So
Fritz.
I'm
sorry.
concerned about that because it means that people who have access to directors and commissioners might be able to get their foot in the door, and whereas maybe there's 6 other firms who are doing the same thing, but they didn't think that to go and say, hey, buddy, can I get a job?
Yeah. So in this process, we are going to require disclosure. So if we receive a unsolicited proposal, we would put together a notice and issue it on our vendor portal for 30 days that says, hey, contractor vendor community, so-and-so submitted an unsolicited proposal to us for this. If there's anybody else that feels like they can do that, let us know. We'll retract the unsolicited proposal and then go the route of a competitive procurement. But if nobody comes forward during those 30 days, then it would follow the path of a sole source. And it would allow us to negotiate directly with that firm if we were able to negotiate and execute a contract.
Okay, and is that in the code about the 30 days?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
I also have a question about, so let's say somebody comes with a proposal, we go through this process. How do we ensure that this doesn't continue to status quo contracting? How do we make sure that that same opportunity is available for women and minority-owned firms? And who's going to get that information out to people to let them know that if they've got a great idea, the city's interested in listening to it?
In response to an unsolicited proposal or just generally?
If it's unsolicited, just the process of getting an unsolicited proposal allows for, as Commissioner Fritz said, people who have access, people who already are having conversations with bureau directors, people who live next door to them, who play golf with them, et cetera, right? So if I'm not a golf player, I don't live next door to them, how do I know that there's this opportunity for me to not wait for the city to come up with an RFP, that I could actually approach purchasing and say, I got a great idea?
I think we would leverage the relationships through Tiffany Penson with all of our community partners, the Fair Contracting Forum. We would try to broadcast it as broadly as possible and educate the contracting community on the potential for these relationships and encourage them to do those, to make those efforts.
But we've already admitted that 80% of the people who do business in the city of Portland are not not certified by the state. They don't, they don't do business with us. So I think this may be a little premature until we have some parameters that ensure that we're not exacerbating the disparity that already exists, because I can see all kind of ways that this could be misused.
Okay. Okay, moving on. Emergency procurements. We talked about this earlier in construction, and there was a discussion about procurement services bringing those reports to council at the next opportunity for those contracts that would be now signed at the $1 million threshold. We're happy to do that. If there's any more discussion, we're happy to have that, but I feel like we touched on this earlier.
The only thing I would add is to be consistent with the rule that the utilities adopted, if there is an emergency procurement and it then comes back to council for an after award report, let's make sure that goes on the regular agenda and not on the consent agenda, because it'll be above the $500,000 threshold.
Yes, we will do that. Direct contracts, the next slide. Again, we're asking council to replicate this authority in goods and services and also increase it from $100,000 to $150,000. Again, we've included the slides earlier that just show what the percentage is of contracts that go to certified versus non-certified firms to support that code change. And again, I think that direct contracting in goods and services will make these numbers move in a positive way. Pre-qualification. We talked about during the construction slides. Again, this is, we're proposing to increase the threshold from $250,000 to $1 million. We've worked closely with the pre-qualification board. We've worked closely with the chief engineers and the bureaus. We've gotten them to agree to increase this if council authorizes it. And again, we think that this is removing a barrier and aligning the same threshold with our prime contractor development program.
But then again, this is not just for co-bid firms, right?
That's correct.
So then what's the oversight of whether the firm can actually do it?
So there's that responsibility questionnaire that we've developed that would apply to contracts under $1 million that aren't in PCDP.
Okay, thank you.
The next slide, Bureau Director Grant Making Authority. So right now, the threshold to award grants without council approval is $5,000. That threshold was set in 2010. We're proposing to increase it to $25,000. And this next slide shows the data from last fiscal year. So the city made 108 grant awards totaling $10 million. Under the current code, 93 of those grants came to council for approval, representing $9.97 million. With our proposed change to increase the threshold to $25,000, if the same number of grants came next year after this change is in effect, 53 grants for $9.57 million would come to council for approval. So it reduces the number from 93 to 53, but it still represents a very, very high percentage of the spend that is going through those grants.
So this is one that I have a lot of problem with because I think it's important when you're giving money to an organization, I think the public needs to know about that. And the only way they're going to know is if it comes to council for more than 5,000.
Okay.
Because we're talking about all of the small grants in the neighborhood system would then not have to come to council.
Yes, yes. A large beneficiary of this would be the Office of Civic Life. And, maybe Glenn could speak to his experience working with that bureau over the past couple fiscal years at the end, trying to get these grant awards done and come to council so that they can get the money into the hands of the people that they're granting. We feel like that this is incrementally raising it, and you still see a large portion of the spend. You still see 9.5 million of 10 million with this change.
This is all tied into the proposed changes to 3.96, and I think making this change at this time is really complicates some of the other things we're trying to work on.
Okay. Okay. Well, we can maybe explore that. Yeah. I don't know how the other offices feel.
Well, it's a work session. We're exchanging ideas and going to get feedback from individual commissioners. And
Okay.
my expectation is you'll bring the entire package back, and we'll adopt some. We won't adopt parts of it. We'll adopt other parts of it, but we're not deliberating today.
Okay. So I'll move on to the intergovernmental agreement slide. So right now, the threshold is set at $5,000, and it was put in place in 2008. And we're proposing to increase that to $1 million to align with our PTE, our construction, and our goods and services contracts. The next slide shows the data. So last fiscal year, or the last 2 fiscal years, the city executed 178 intergovernmental agreements totaling $99 million. Under our current code, at the $5,000 threshold, council saw 100% of those IGAs. With our proposed change to increase it to $1 million, if the same number of IGAs came to council in the future as came in the past 2 years, you would see 14 IGAs representing $81 million. So it's a huge reduction. It's 164 less IGAs that would come, but you're still seeing 80% of the spend through those agreements. And contracting with another government agency, in theory, is less risky than contracting with a private firm. And to align the IGA threshold with the rest of our contracts would make a lot of sense for the bureaus when they're planning their efforts to prepare for council. And this would also take my position's authority and direct it to bureau directors. There's no reason why procurement services should be involved in IGAs. It's outside of our code. And so we're removing ourselves with this change as well from this process.
So, but then the bureau director doesn't have to bring it to council either.
That's true.
Again, this is a transparency and accountability issue. The reason, we do a lot of contracts, and they're always kind of In some of the ones that Commissioner Fish especially brings are very interesting when you did not think that sewer pipe replacement was going to be all that interesting, or a pump station or whatever. But it's explaining to the public, here's where your money is going.
I understand, but we don't bring contracts under $1 million to council. That was approved last April. So we're just aligning the IGAs with our other contract
This
thresholds.
is where I think we set a slippery slope in process. I was with you all the time until we got to this bit, but I think maybe we should revisit the, do we bring contracts, like, we don't have to bring contracts of less than $1 million to council, because that's a lot of money.
I understand. I'll just, if I can benchmark ourselves against some of the other public agencies, if that's helpful. So the other agencies have similar thresholds. Metro and Multnomah County don't bring any of their contracts to their elected officials.
Well, they have a different form of government for a start.
I'm just providing a comparison. I understand. Again, I think we've worked with the bureaus to try to come up with measures in our process that can get dollars out on the street more efficiently. This is an opportunity to reduce a lot of the work on behalf of the bureaus in preparing those ordinances. I understand it's a transparency issue, but we're trying to reflect that you would still see more than 80% of the spend that goes through IGAs, but drastically reduce the number of IGAs that would come, which represents, in my opinion, those bureaus allowing themselves to get those agreements in place faster and have those projects be implemented more efficiently.
Can I ask a question? In terms of the IGAs, the city executed 178 IGAs during the time frame you've noted. How many of those IGAs did the council reject?
I don't know. I don't think any.
I mean, I don't remember the last time we were presented with an IGA where we did anything other than adopt it. And they're normally, because of the small dollar amounts, they're on consent.
Right.
So just food for thought. I understand the balance here. I think Commissioner Fritz raises an important question about transparency and giving someone in the public the right to know we're doing it so they can object. On the other hand, we are trying to get your benchmarks down. We're trying to speed up the delivery of dollars out the door. And, this is 164 IGAs that wouldn't come to council, but 80% of the money would still be coming to council for approval. So whether this is the right balance or not, I'm not ready to make a judgment, but I appreciate you're giving us this option to consider, because if we do want dollars out the door quicker, somewhere in the system we have to give.
Thank you.
But it's also giving the bureau director the power to obligate the city without the council approving it. So it's really taking away the authority of the council to make million-dollar decisions and giving it to a bureau director.
I would say that each commissioner in charge could delegate or not delegate that authority and want to see those contracts and sign them themselves. And that could be an opportunity to bring it before council if you feel like it's an opportunity to tell a good story.
I was just going to say, that's another slippery slope, right? Because all three of us could operate totally differently, and we could have a different threshold, and then it would really be insane, right? So I agree with my colleagues that we don't know what the right balance is. I'm still concerned that bureau directors have the authority to spend $1 million without us saying it's okay, right? I still think that that's too much money to just delegate.
Yeah, but in fairness, you don't have to delegate.
It's already been delegated.
No, you as the commissioner in charge can direct your bureau directors that this has to have a co-signature from you as part of a routine process, and you have that right if you believe that's the additional level of accountability and oversight that you need. That is your prerogative.
Then we get back into the disparity between the bureaus.
Right. Well, and some bureaus have a lot more money than others do, so it just exacerbates the disparate outcomes and the disparate accountability.
Right.
And so we're not going to solve this today, but I appreciate you bringing it up. But
Good conversation.
it is a good conversation, and we will have to continue this conversation.
I'm not sure
Thank you.
what the right balance is either, but
Okay.
I appreciate the conversation.
Okay, thank you. So this is the last slide regarding a code change. So If you recall last spring when the security guard services contract came before council, it came as a CPO report, and there wasn't public testimony because the authorizing ordinance had been approved by council before we issued the solicitation. So with this change, we're shifting the time when an authorizing ordinance comes to council and proposing to accompany the CPO report with an authorizing ordinance, which would allow for public comment at that opportunity. And one of the reasons for this, again, is on behalf of our bureaus, they spend a lot of time coming and preparing those authorizing ordinances. Oftentimes they're on the consent agenda. Oftentimes there's very little discussion. And so this would give council as well as the public an opportunity to have a discussion on the procurement process and on the contract that we're proposing to award.
Mayor Wheeler doesn't take testimony on reports,
Correct.
so the public would not have an opportunity to comment.
With this change, they would, because the authorizing ordinance would come at the time the CPO report is being presented. So it'd be a co-legislative action. It'd be a CPO report as well as an authorizing ordinance. And there would be 30 days in
The point of
between.
having the ordinance, the authorizing ordinance come earlier is so that more people have awareness. If they're not on all of your lists, they're not reading the newspaper, they've got to see it on the council agenda, they think, oh, I could bid on that.
Yes. But I guess just anecdotally, rarely there's any sort of discussion at council about those authorizing ordinances, and they're typically on the consent agenda that
Well,
gets.
and in fairness, this is one way to slice it. The council could just change its rules and have a more liberal policy in terms of testimony on reports. It has been the practice, though, that the same three people testify on the reports, and generally not on the report, but on some other issue. So I think we have to balance how much transparency, how much public interest is there, and again, how much workflow are we putting on the Bureau?
Well, let's think, it's not necessarily just a sewer pipe or a water pipe. It's a police contract for body cameras. I think the public should be involved in deciding, are we going to issue this solicitation, rather than just, we've did the solicitation, we've now promised the money to this company, and the public can say, well,
The authorization and the budget item is an item that we vote on. The procurement piece on the report, it may or may not be subject to a public testimony, but we can't get to a report without a council authorization.
I'm just pointing out that there are different kinds of contracts, and sometimes it is the same three people who are interested in them, and sometimes the whole city is interested in them.
So do we have a few minutes left set aside? I mean, the next thing is the process map, which we were all going to concede that none of the three of us can read.
Right,
but
sorry.
But it looks impressive. And do we have time just to do some questions?
Sure.
And I'll defer to my colleagues. I have a few. So first of all, pardon me? What?
She's the boss of us.
Yeah,
That's why I was
Commissioner
deferring.
Husty is graciously giving you the mic, but I shall give you the mic.
Thank you. First of all, terrific PowerPoint, thank you, and really strong presentation. I want to underscore that I'll be asking your bureau, the Budget Office, and others as appropriate to flag risk for us in a more comprehensive way, just like we do with technology oversight, and I'm glad that Commissioner Hardesty brought that into the conversation earlier. There's something about that, red, yellow, green coding, which really gets our attention and helps shape a debate. But we sometimes have conversations where there is a risk question that doesn't, in my judgment, get elevated by the presenters, consistent with where it's maybe buried in the text. And I just want to encourage you to consider that, and we can have that conversation. I'm going to give my colleagues a preview that we're working with procurement now on a healthy food procurement, which is designed to give city bureaus the option of having healthier options, healthier food options at meetings. And we thank procurement et al. For the work they're doing. We'll have something this fall for the council to discuss. I want to come back to the question of dashboards. I think the mayor asked the right question when he said, what's your metric? Having a dashboard where you say that this is how long it takes us without knowing whether that's a best practice or that's a reasonable metric, is about half the information we need. And I want to also always make sure that our dashboards reflect what our customers think is important in terms of the thresholds that we're meeting. And I appreciate that you are reaching out to our customers significantly, and that's demonstrated through this presentation. I want to ask you a question about cost, because there's a lot of confusion in my experience with how we talk about cost. It starts with how we evaluate projects at the earliest estimates and understanding what a low confidence estimate is. And I think we need a primer on that, reminding the public that a low confidence estimate means we don't know what we don't know. And therefore, we're putting down a number, but we can't justify it. And that figure is going to go through substantial change, and that we are actually required to declare whether it's low, medium, high confidence. Those are not arbitrary designations. But I think it would be worth doing in your next presentation to council, just a quick reminder about what those three categories are and why we often encourage people when they don't know what they don't know to come in at a low confidence. The next area of cost that we deal with a lot is amendments to existing contracts. And amendments raise at least two concerns in my mind. One is, are we getting to the area of cost overruns where it becomes a council concern? And second, is there a point in which we should do a redo? Because we should allow a broader range of contractors to participate rather than just continually updating an existing contract. I think that needs some additional conversation. The third is where we are literally rescoping something. And I think the best example of that was 2015, where Director Stewart and the Water Bureau came in and said, we have a completely different scope of a project for the Washington Park Reservoir. And what we've learned from our professionals who've come in and done soil samples and geotechnical work is that we have to build a fortress around the buried reservoir for it to be safe. That's a rescoping. We're no longer with the low confidence estimate. That's an entirely different project. There was a work session and then a council hearing, public hearing, which rescoped it. But again, I think people need to understand the difference between that and other things we do. And then, at what point do we do a do-over? What's the trigger that says we're going to do and also, to what extent does the inflationary cost of goods and services, particularly materials that are subject to international competition, in other words, at what point does the bid process drive up the cost in ways we didn't anticipate? We have seen in the last year more inflationary factors, partly because of the competition in the marketplace, also partly because of uncertainty around steel costs and other materials, because of sort of nascent trade wars with countries like China. So all of those are examples. All of those have some impact on cost and the way we talk about cost. And I'm going to just urge you to give us a primer at the next opportunity so the public is clear about what is the difference between a cost overrun versus a rescoping versus getting bids where the prices are higher than we expect. What is our grading process around low, medium, and high confidence? And how do we have confidence throughout the process that we're getting best value? Those are important and complicated issues, and I would welcome a primer. And then I just want to say I really appreciated the conversation around the balance between making the process more efficient and also preserving oversight and accountability. And my colleagues have said their piece on that. I don't know where I'm going to land on it, but I think it was a good discussion. Thank you for stimulating that discussion. Sure. Because at the end of the day, even if there isn't a lot of public comment, the fact that it's on our agenda is an important value, because it means that on the odd chance that someday someone really does call foul, there it is, and they have a chance to come in and be heard. And we have to balance those two. So overall, I appreciate the work you're doing. I'm not sure James Posey is the ultimate endorsement, but it counts in my book. but what it means is that you're getting attention for doing things differently and for trying to make our systems work better for the contracting community, particularly those who've been shut out from opportunities in the past. So I appreciate that, and I thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
Well said, Commissioner. Commissioner Fish made me think of a process that I hope the code change will help with, which is the extension of contracts ad nauseum. I've seen contracts get extended 6, 7, 8 times with no rationale at all. And that's not something that I tend to support, because I think after a few years, we should not be extending contracts. We should be actually providing new opportunities, because, maybe there are new people in business that are doing the work, and that might have been the only person before. So I hope that whatever code changes are going to be coming back to us, that we're actually limiting the amount of times that we can actually allow for those extensions without some compelling reason why this is the only game in town. And Lester, I just want to say, it's telling that this is the first time you've done a work session, or your bureau's done a work session with the city. And I hope that this is certainly not the last time, because it's important that we really understand how public dollars are being spent and whether or not we're getting the value for the dollars that we're spending. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, excellent presentation. Thank you, everybody, for being here. So I'm assuming the process now is you're going to refile the code or put some code amendments into an ordinance. If commissioners disagree with a particular part of it, there would be an amendment to take that out. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much, everybody. We're adjourned.
Thank you so much.